one of the magical practices still widespread across the Balkans are the healing rites, performed with different types of incantations. Those are not merely poetry spells, but are also not something that you can improvise freely. Here, words matter, and if you use them wrongly, they will fail. But if you use them in the proper manner, they could heal illness, fear, and even broken heart. So, lower your voices because today we are explaining Bayane. If you know anything about healing practices in the Balkans, you have heard about this type of chanted incantations, spoken formulas used primarily for healing. Now, the main differs, of course, it's Bayane, Bayane, Basma, Discontische, Sematiasma, and so on and so on. And the idea, but the idea stays the same. The logic stays remarkably the same throughout the whole Balkans. So, this is a type of text that is usually pronounced under one's breath, primarily for healing, as I already said. It is murmured, it is spoken in a rhythmic manner, and it is performed by people who are known throughout the community to be skilled healers, and their names also differ. Most often they are related with the term of the incantations in the region itself. So all of those incantations are learned in one way or another. Those are not those type of spells like in modernity that people will imagine, or not imagine but create rationally by themselves. Usually people who are healers have inherited this from their blood relatives. This could be some grandma or your mother or your aunt or whatever, and the words is the knowledge that is kept. So the words are the things that you have to learn, remember, and in some cases even steal in order to get them. But throughout the region, it is something that is, I think I say this a lot of times, but it's still very much alive. And people will go to traditional healers in order to heal different types of problems. So, as I said, this type of knowledge is passed through family lines, through your blood relatives, but in the last couple of decades, this tradition has been in a way changed, because if your own family does not want to receive the knowledge, you cannot force them in a way. So if somebody is to heal people from their community, they have to be willing to do so. And another belief is that the healers must transmit their knowledge. They should not die without passing to somebody else their knowledge. So healers will often, when there are no family, when no family wants to take the knowledge, they would transfer it to anyone who is willing to do so. So in this sense, what we see in the recent years or recent decades, as I said, is that this heritage transmission is not so often the case anymore. But there's a very important thing to be said here, that oftentimes people will think about healers and they'll think about women, but it was and it's not only the women who are healers. And I have come to different ideas about who is the more powerful healer in this traditional sense. And in some regions, people will believe that the healer must be a woman, and in others, it's vice versa. So they will believe that a man, or most of the time, those are elders. So some grandpa will be a much better healer, and there's this belief that even the healing will not succeed if it's a woman. So we have this idea too, that we have both women and men alike. Now, as I said, those are people who are part of the community. Those are people who are well known, who are well respected for the work they do, even nowadays. And most of the time they are known not necessarily by their own name, but by the region they are from, or the village. The healer from this village, the grandma from that region. So people will know them and they will seek their help. So for instance, if you have some type of problem that has to be addressed with a traditional healer, you will go to that village and ask around. So this is something that we still do, even in this age of technology. Now, what are the reasons you would go and seek such a specialist? Of course, in the past, the traditional healers were, well, the only healers, and those were people who had some form of knowledge about herbs, about remedies, about fixing dislocated shoulders, or making bandages to broken bones. Those were people who had not only the, let's say, spiritual knowledge of the incantations, because those are healing right before anything else, but they also had the knowledge of the physical world and how to address different types of ailments. Nowadays, most of the healers will do healing rites for things that contemporary medicine cannot deal with. And this has to be something that you remember, because it's very interesting that the healing rites that have been preserved in the most part are those that the contemporary medicine cannot address. Like, the most common one is healing from evil eye or healing from fear. And those two are probably the reason why healing rites and traditional healers have managed to survive in the modern age. And this is, I find it to be very interesting, because oftentimes we'll think about tradition and traditional magical practices in that matter. as something that is preserved in a strict order and in a strict way, while in reality, the things that are preserved are the things that make sense now. So, we will not go to a traditional healer in order to heal a snake bite or to heal a broken limb, because we have better alternatives nowadays. As a matter of fact, many of the healers nowadays, not only nowadays, actually back in the beginning of the century when medical help was rather available, many of them would advise, this is not for me, you have to seek a proper doctor. And this is something that I really want to emphasize, because it's very specific about the way those type of rites are preserved. So they preserve what can be used, and they don't preserve the things that can be done in a better way, to put it mildly. In any case, the healing rites, the Bayane, is something that is not a daily practice, but rather something you do when there's something wrong that has to be set straight. And this is regardless of which type of Bayane are we speaking about. The text of those incantations is something that's specifically regional, and it can differ from family to family, from place to place, of course, but the common and basic rules, as far as we can speak about rules, are that the text must be repeated a couple of times. Most of the times those will be 3, 7, 9, 3 times 3 times, or there are some instances that the incantations will be repeated even 40 times. So, but most of the time in specific situations. Now, part of the Bayane, or the healing rite, is the diagnosis of what are we actually healing. So a form of divination is performed often when dealing with such a problem. So there are plenty of divinatory methods used by different healers across the Balkans. I cannot even begin to name them, but the first thing you want to do is address what is wrong. Has something or someone done this, especially when we're speaking about healing from fear. And only after that, go to the next stage, which is the healing itself. Actually, in some cases, in some regions, the diagnosis is the healing itself. For instance, this popular method of melting lead in hot lead in cold water that creates a shape. It's used for healing fear, and it simultaneously shows what is the reason for this fear and kind of drives it out of the body of the person that's being healed in this moment. So you have the divinatory and healing phase combined in a way, but that's of course not always the case. In many of the Bayane formulas, you will have the healer address the illness itself. More often than not, this is commanding rather than pleading. So the healer would command the illness, or they will instruct the illness what to do. They will send it away or something like that, and very rarely would they plead with the illness to let go this person. And since this is rather hard to do, most of the healers would call to allies, and those would be most of the time different spirits, but mostly saints or Muslim holy figures. And sometimes the text that people will use might include nonsense, so words that have no meaning, which is something very common in magical practices. Sometimes they would do some sort of a narrative that will recall, for instance, how this person went somewhere, they met the saint, they asked them, and so on and so on. Sometimes it would be in the form of a dialogue with the patient. So the healer would ask, what do you want? They will answer, and in some direct or ritual symbolic way, they will deal with the illness verbally and thus in the physical realm too. But overall, the incantations rarely ask, they state, this is like this, and in this way the formula seeks to transform reality itself. The incantations could be used on their own or together with different actions. And this is again very regional, specific for different regions. And you have places where you have only spoken words and no action whatsoever, or you have places where you have no spoken words but many actions to compensate for that lack of vocabulary. But most of the time you would have something in between. And the same goes for the length of the texts. You would have regions where you have shorter Bayane, and you would have regions where you have longer ones. Honestly, this makes it a bit difficult to talk about this topic because in order to explain what Bayane is, you have to have some specific examples of said Bayane. And in order to have specific examples, you have to be focusing on a specific region. So you could see some kind of links between the practices themselves. Truth is that just like any other folklore fragment, you have to have an idea of the whole picture, of the whole culture, of the whole context, even the time when those things have evolved, when they were used, and so on. And it's very interesting because with modern times we see changes in the way the traditional formulas are presented. So, for instance, we have oftentimes in the healing of fear incantations, we would have let me start from the beginning. So sometimes you have healing of fear which lists the different things that you could have gotten scared of. And while in the past that would be if it's from a bear, if it's from a dog, if it's from a man, if it's from a woman. Nowadays, healers will include things like if it's from a fire engine, if it's from a plane, if it's from a car, if it's from a man, so they would change the healing incantations to fit the current narratives and the current culture and the current context. So the same goes with the actions. While not so long ago, every healer had to use a bowl that was from clay or earthenware, as they call them. Nowadays, they prefer easily available materials like metal, even plastic, because it's easy to get them in different colors and they don't break. So as we as we observe the practices from the past, we have to acknowledge that they always change, and whatever we read in the books is merely a moment in time caught on paper. So if you have the ability to see something, observe some practice from the Balkans, and it feels a bit modern, that might not be necessarily a bad thing, because those modern elements in traditional practices oftentimes are what preserves them. Because in order to preserve a practice, it has to have some value for the individuals and for the society itself. And thus, seeing a plastic bowl in the hands of a traditional healer might not be so bad after all, because you're seeing it in the hands of the traditional healer. You're not seeing it in a pretty picture printed decades ago. So, in order to have a living practice, this practice needs to change. And what we can do, regardless whether we are traditional healers or not, is to keep the magic alive.